Good, good. Good morning. It's not on. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for being with us today. Good morning, and my name is Shawn Bacher. I am the president of the Nashville Public Library Foundation, and it is a joy to welcome you, whether you're here in person or streaming online. Every great city has a heart. For Nashville, that heart beats in our public library, where learning and opportunity come alive every single day. Each year, the foundation brings a distinguished author to Nashville for a week-long celebration honoring their achievements while raising essential funds to support the library's education and literacy programs. This event is months in the making, and it's only possible because of the generosity of so many of you. First, I want to thank our public lecture sponsors, Dollar General, and Carol and Bobby Frist. Their support makes this event free for all of us to attend. We're also deeply grateful for First Horizon, our Literary Award weekend presenting sponsor, and to the Sandra Shatton Foundation, and our Literary Award honoree sponsor. And thank you. And thank you to our extraordinary co-chairs, Tiffany and Alfred de Graffenried, Lee Pratt and Neil Krugman, and Lindsay and Tyson Moore. They provided amazing leadership and vision to create this wonderful weekend. We're honored to have several city council members with us today: Terry Vo, Joy Stiles, Sandy Ewing, Aaron Evans, Jacob Kupin, all champions of the library and our literacy in our community. Finally, a special thanks to Dr. McShepard Ray and Martin Luther King Jr. High School for hosting us, and to Jon Meacham, Nashville's own literary treasure, for being a part of this celebration. Now, a show of hands. Who here thinks the Nashville Public Library is one of the best things about our city? Me too. Our library is so much more than a building full of books. It's a place that cultivates informed citizens, prepares a skilled workforce, and connects people through knowledge and stories. But programs like this, the ones that make NPL a true community jewel, require more than public funding alone. That's where the foundation steps in, to expand what's possible for our library. I believe deeply in the power of a story, and that connection is a force multiplier. Recently, we received a letter from a donor whose mother had passed away. In her honor, he asked friends to give to the library. He shared that when she was 12, her mother gave her a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The novel moved her so deeply that she reread it every year. She said it shaped her life, taught her that all people deserve to be treated equally with understanding, kindness, compassion, and justice. Several donors have now dedicated books in the collection in her memory. Those books will reach new readers, and maybe one of them will find in those pages the same courage and hope she did. That's what your support makes possible. It keeps stories alive. It multiplies kindness. It builds a better city, one reader at a time. These are challenging times. It can be easy to focus on what divides us or discourages us. But here, in spaces like this, and in our library, we find light. You showed up today for something hopeful, something that connects us. That's the power of this community. Every year, I see familiar faces at this event, and it means the world to know you keep coming back, to celebrate, to give, and to believe in what the library makes possible. So today, I want to ask you to take that belief one step further. If you're passionate about our library, become a hero in the story. You can sign up as a library ambassador and help us advocate for public funding, or become a monthly donor for as little as $5 a month. You can keep our library programs thriving for every learner, every reader, every neighbor, every day of the year. Together, we can write the next great chapter for Nashville. Thank you for believing in your library and for helping us keep the story going. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend and tremendous advocate for this library and for literacy in our community, Deneen Torr, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Philanthropy at Dollar General.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to be here with you today. You know, Dollar General and the Dollar General Literacy Foundation are honored to be longtime supporters of our Nashville Public Library because we believe, just like you, and just like you heard Sean say just a moment ago, great cities don't just have great heart, they have great libraries, right? And ours is simply extraordinary. It is exciting to be a part of the beautiful work they do, whether through their fabulous collections or incredible programming. This is truly something for everyone at our Nashville Public Library. And one of the beautiful things about our library, and something that we have felt especially over the last few months with the unfortunate closure of our main library, is that it's not just contained in four walls downtown, but brought to life through the programs in our schools and communities and programs like today. So the Literary Award Public Lecture offers a free opportunity for our neighbors to hear from an incredible award-winning distinguished author about the story behind the stories, the inspiration, passion, and purpose that fuels that creativity. And it is a real honor to introduce our 2025 Literary Award winner. Amor Towles is an award-winning novelist whose elegant prose and memorable characters have captivated readers worldwide. His breakthrough novel, Rules of Civility, became a beloved bestseller and was named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the best books of the year. A Gentleman in Moscow spent 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list and was adapted into a hit limited series by Paramount starring Ewan McGregor. And The Lincoln Highway, about four boys on an unexpected cross-country journey, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, won widespread critical acclaim, and is being adapted into a feature film. And most recently, Table for Two, again a New York Times bestseller, showcases his mastery of narrative through a collection of short stories and a novella. Together, his books have not only touched our hearts and moved us, but they have sold more than 8 million worldwide and have been translated into more than 40 languages. And this year, guys, we are in for a special treat. Our honoree is joined in conversation with Nashville's own literary titans, his friend and ours, Jon Meacham. Jon is a Pulitzer Prize-winning presidential historian, contributing writer to the New York Times Book Review, and Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University. He is America's voice on history and democracy and brings a deep understanding of the American experience to this conversation. So please help me welcome two amazing literacy giants, Amor Towles and Jon Meacham.
Thank you.
We do this every Saturday morning.
Oh, you do? That's great.
You Yankees don't probably, you know, y'all are. So, welcome to Nashville.
Thank you, John.
Did you get your passport stamped on your way south of McLean? We're honored to have you. Huge as you can tell, huge fans, and I want to do a little bit of, as a biographer, I want to do a little Amor biography. All right? How the hell did this happen? How did we end up here? You were a banker, right? You were making money, and now here we all are.
So the answer to the question is I began. I decided I knew I wanted to be a writer in first grade, and it's all I really ever wanted to do. And I wrote fiction in high school. I wrote it in college. I wrote it in graduate school. And I moved to New York at the age of 25 with the intention of being.
From where?
I grew up in the Boston area. And so after graduate school, I moved to New York City with the intention of being a writer. And I was living in a small legal sublet, in the East Village. And I was feeling a little claustrophobic, and I was broke.
I was going to say, you moved to New York to be a writer, and then you decided you wanted to eat.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Okay.
It was the food was kicked in. Yeah. The need for food. So then I joined a friend of mine who was in the investment business, and 21 years later, we were still working side by side. But about 10 years into, for the first 10 years that we were working together, I stopped writing as we were building the firm. And then I had this feeling that if I did not write a book that I was proud of, say by the time I was 50, I would probably end up, bitter and a drinker. And now I'm just a drinker, because eventually, at around the age of 35, I started writing a book. I wrote a book for 7 years. I didn't like it and set it aside. And then I learned a lot from that process and wrote another book, and that was Rules of Civility. And when that became a bestseller, I resigned from the firm, and I've been a full-time writer ever since.
So so first grade was, you just loved stories. What are the stories you remember? What are the books from those days that stick with you? I think
the first book that addiction that I had was the Hardy Boys, for sure.
Right.
We didn't, like a lot of middle-class families in the 70s, we didn't go out to eat a lot. We didn't go to the movies that often. That would be a big deal and stuff. But my father's thing was, I will always buy you a book. And so I got the first Hardy Boys, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I think I read it in a day. And then I was just like every day on him. I need the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Yeah. So I spent a summer working my way through that, and then you kind of get a little older, and I wanted to be a fiction writer at this time already. And then I fell in love with, a little bit older, and with Ray Bradbury's short stories, and sort of an addiction of that, his horror and sci-fi. And then, I think I read the James Bond books and Agatha Christie, But then what happened is this sort of 17, 18, even though I want, as you say, I wanted to be a storyteller. I know that's, I love storytelling. Is 17, 18, you're given something different to read. Let's say, I don't know, maybe it was Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, not even that long a work. But as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, okay. All right, so this is what writing can be.
There were no jalopies.
Yeah, I know. What do you mean?
There's always a jalopy in the Hardy Boys. Remember?
Okay, yes.
Remember?
No, I see, okay. No,
Joseph
Conrad.
Try to keep up.
In Heart of Darkness, there were no jalopies.
We don't want to have to give back the portrait.
Okay. But you're reading something like Joseph Conrad, and the scope of the work, the use of language, the layers of theme, the poetic aspects of it, the psychology of the characters that's depicted, all of it is so compelling that, as I say, you're like, okay, now I get it. This is what storytelling can actually be. And then that really launches the hunt. And where, from that point forward, I'm just moving through writers. So, discovering Faulkner and reading, the works of Faulkner, and discovering the Latin American magical realists. So you're reading all of Marquez and sort of learning from that. Discovering the post Second World War French experimental writers. And I mean those guys. The characters didn't have names, the dialogue didn't have quotations, and nothing ever happens, it was fantastic. You're like, wow, So, but each one of these, and then of course you find the Russians, and each one of these things is sort of opening up your eyes to a different way of telling stories. Not only the scope of the tale, but all the different elements, how to approach simile, how to approach metaphor, how to approach allegory, how to approach illusion, how to pace, how to do point of view, how to do settings and structures, all of that is, you're reading to take that in, and I think that I've come to think of it like this. It's like, let's say, to understand the mindset of the young reader-writer, right, is that the analogy would be, like, let's say you get invited to a party, and let's say it's like a Great Gatsby-esque party on Long Island, right? And so, you arrive, and everybody's dressed up fancy. It's this beautiful living room, and you kind of appreciate the space, and the food is delicious, and you're enjoying the music, and you have a cocktail, and you meet an interesting stranger. That's your experience at the party. Okay, well, if you're the young reader-writer, the analogy would be that you're invited to the party, just like everybody else, but you're a thief. So imagine that for a second. You're a thief who's invited to the Gatsby party. Because then when you come in, yeah, you enjoy the food and the music and the conversation, but at the same time, you're checking the layout of the building. You're looking at what's in the various rooms, because, your intention is to come back and rob them, right? And you're looking at the hostess. When you see the hostess, you're studying her necklace and asking yourself, okay, if I get that and I take it apart and use all the gems to make new jewelry so that I can't be traced, how much money am I going to get out of that, And so this is the way I think that the young reader-writer is reading. He or she is enjoying the books just like you are, the events in the books, the themes, the drama, what have you, but at the same time, this other thing is going on, where the young reader-writer is casing the joint, studying consciously or unconsciously the structure of the book, how all the various components are at work, how the various elements of craft are used, so that ideally you can become more fluent in the art form that you're pursuing.
So if you I'm going to say something nice about my friend, which I don't often do, and certainly not in front of him, but given the way so much of contemporary fiction is, if you were an answer to a lot of those of us who wanted what you do, you were an answer to a prayer to some extent, because you are, I don't know if you like this or not, but you're a novelist, a fiction writer of manners and morals, in the way that Austen and Trollope and Dickens and Balzac were. And I was recommending to Amor that he needs to read Our Peter Taylor, right, as well. Because you can because you've broken into these houses and you've stolen, right, which we approve of. And these days you can get pardoned pretty easily. Just a stray one for you. Let's be clear, if you're here, you were going to laugh. Weren't going to be any hissing here. Go over the line to Williamson County, whole different thing. Sorry. Sean's rethinking this whole programming decision right about now. But you write what you see, either literally or figuratively. And I think that's part of the power of what you do, is that these are worlds that are accessible to us, but you bring an angle of vision that we would not have. That is, we would be in the room, but we don't see things until you see them for us. And I'm wondering, I think of this as a very Victorian, or I think of this as a 19th century skill, the observational fiction writer. So I'm curious, is Trollope important to you? Is Dickens is a little broad, but I think of Trollope, I think of Austen. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to your question is certainly my love of the novel, my sense of what it can achieve, my ambition for what I'm trying to do. It all goes back to the 19th century novel. Now, I'm very influenced by the 20th century writers too, but the, you know, reading a work of Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, of Jane Austen, of Dickens too, of, you know, Henry James at the end of the century, you know, the sense of the elegance and the complexity of the works that they were doing, and the satisfaction of them, you know, the degree to which they generated satisfaction, all influenced me greatly. And I love the experimentation that occurred in the 20th century as ways of thinking about the novel were approached in new ways. And I like to steal from those guys, but all in the service of doing a little bit more of a 19th century project than you know, a 1960s style novel. And I guess, you know, one of the funny things about it is, I guess, that sort of speaks to this is I remember I went to Yale in the 80s, and at the time at Yale in the 80s, it was, and pretty much a lot of the, you know, let's say the Ivy League certainly, but a lot of college campuses, it was received wisdom that as an artist, whatever your art form, that the last thing that you should be thinking about is your audience, right? That true art and the true artist was pursuing the artistic project for themselves, you know, with their own sense of ambition and experimentation, and, you know, the audience be damned, right? And that's the way the great art was made. And this, you know, makes sense at the time because it was kind of coming after things like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf rethinking the novel in these ways that, you know, if you look at Joyce, where it could be quite challenging and obscure and being praised for that. But, you know, in art it was happening, right? You make the shift from representation to abstraction. And in music, you know, things were happening. So there was a sort of sense of that. And I just remember being, I don't know, in my 30s maybe, and looking back and thinking, that was crazy, you know? This notion of creating art without the audience, that hadn't been true for 1,000 years. You know, and if you went back and looked at Leonardo da Vinci, you know, he was making art with his audience in mind. Dickens and Tolstoy were. Dostoevsky was, of all people. He totally was interested in his audience. And so what kind of affected me is being like, because those works are entertaining. You know, the great 19th century novels are entertaining, which was kind of a dirty word in a way when I was coming of age in the academy. And so for me, the challenge really became, how can you take this sort of the complexity and the richness and the sort of the well-crafted aspects of those great 19th century novelists, and using whatever new elements of craft are out there, but still build this thing that was rich and satisfying and entertaining at the same time, I guess. And you know, and that kind of became the mission. And so, but as you say, yes, it goes back to that sort of the early sort of scope of what the novel could be.
So, I think I told you in real time, your collection, I think, is like Dawn Powell, right? This marvelous mid-century Greenwich Village writer, really. But I want to take you back one more book, I think, two more books, which is A Gentleman in Moscow. You're a boy from Massachusetts. To my knowledge, you have never been tried by a Stalinist court. But you can tell us now, how did this happen? What is the origin story of A Gentleman in Moscow?
A Gentleman in Moscow. Well, I mean, the explicit origin story goes back to to give you a sense of my process. I always start for anything, a novel, a short story, with a very simple premise. Something strikes me. Sometimes I see something, sometimes I think of something, sometimes it comes out of the blue, but usually it's very simple. And I was walking into a hotel in Geneva that I used to stay in every year professionally, and I recognized a guy in the lobby from the year before, and I thought, oh man, that guy must live here. And in the elevator on the way upstairs, I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea for a book. Yeah, a guy gets trapped in a hotel for a long period of time. Yeah. Well, and in the room upstairs, I immediately began took like hotel stationery and began to sketch out A Gentleman in Moscow. And I think in that first night, over 6 pages, I had all the major aspects of A Gentleman in Moscow imagined very quickly. And that's not uncommon the way it works for me. Then all the work begins. But the key thing here, which speaks to your question, is that a guy gets trapped in a hotel, could have been set in South America during the era of the dictators, the authoritarians there. It could have been because they had house arrest. You could be in China today, where we have artists today in China living under house arrest in the current leadership in China. But I would never have imagined writing either of those books. And what was different here is that I had fallen in love with a Russian novel as a late teenager. And my interest in the Russian novel had led me to an interest in the Russian avant-garde before the First World War, because that's where Kandinsky is reinventing painting, and Nijinsky and Diaghilev are reinventing dance. Mayakovsky's reinventing poetry. And I'm not just talking about in Russia. I mean, for Europe, right? These movements were happening in Russia in the early 20th century that were changing art throughout the West in these incredibly bold ways. And that got interesting to me. And then I got interested in the Revolutionary era, and then the life of the artists in the gulags. And so over the course of 30 years, I had just been taking in aspects of Russian life and culture as a fan. So when I had this idea of guy gets trapped in a hotel, in an instant I was like, oh yeah, this could be set in Russia. Terrific. It can happen in the hotel across the street from the Kremlin. It can open up, right at the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution, and it can be an aristocrat who's sentenced to house arrest. Those leaps were because of the confidence I had that I could imagine this. Now, a big difference between the two of us is that Jon is a consummate researcher, right? And he is familiar and with historic documents and interviews. He pursues interviews. He goes through archives as a means of building his work. I am not that guy, and so I don't want to turn to research as the foundation for my novels. So when I choose a topic, it does have to be something that I know profoundly enough at a deep level that I can imagine it from now. I do not want to build a novel out of reading Wikipedia, basically, because I don't think that it succeeds. It would succeed for me artistically.
So you had the clear European, Eurasian interests, but also New York society and Hollywood. So was that a lifelong thing? So those are sort of your in a way, your three worlds.
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln Highway is a little different,
yeah.
but those are big ones for me.
Yeah,
and just like you're suggesting, yes, I fell in love with Hollywood of the 30s and 40s as a kid. I watched the movies and sort of imagined the glamour from afar. My grandmother had one of those Life Goes to the Movies. I think that's what it was called. From the 70s or whatever, where it was all of the a compendium of the history of Hollywood at that time, from the 20s to the 70s, with all the great glamorous photographs that had appeared in Life magazine, and you just go through it and be like, oh yes, what a great town, and so you kind of fall in love with it in that sense. And New York was similar. I fell in love with New York through different angles. Through jazz, through some of the writers, of the 20s and 30s. Just through the metropolis itself, and so they became natural stomping grounds for me as I pursued ideas from my imagination.
What was the hardest book to write?
Well, it always is the one you're working on. The one I'm working on now. I mean, you probably feel that way too, right? I mean, you probably feel that way too, because you can imagine there's a lot of doubt that you're carrying through a project. For me, I will design a book for several years, where I'm just filling notebooks with ideas about the book and sort of breaking it down. What happens, the settings, the people, their backgrounds, their personalities, all the events. I'm doing this by hand in notebooks for years before I write an outline and then start to write the book. Then it takes me a couple of years to write the book. And there is plenty of opportunity for doubt along that way, and so that inevitably it's the hardest one is what I'm working on.
How do you write? How do you compose physically?
In practical terms?
Yeah.
The handbooks is all done by hand, but my normal writing practice is I'm at my desk at 8:30 in the morning, Monday through Friday. I write, from 8:30 to noon, and I use it. Having done this design work, I do have a very detailed outline, so I'm progressing pretty much linearly.
Is this on a computer?
On a computer at my desk. And I'll do that from 8:30 to noon, and then I go have lunch by myself, where I will either edit the morning's work by hand or bring a notebook and start imagining tomorrow's, chapter by hand. And I do go back and forth between the computer and writing by hand. And there's one of the reasons is because, and we now know this neurologically, you think very differently when you write by hand. It triggers different throws different synapses in your brain, lights them up differently. And so I will come up with ideas, material by hand that I would not come up with at the keyboard. And so I do like to kind of go back and forth and make the most of the two formats.
Do you read it aloud?
I read aloud I read to myself, where I'm very interested in the sound of the sentences, without question. And so I do read out loud, but I don't read out loud. I don't know if it's a small distinction.
No, it's a pretty big one.
I can hear it.
I'm just a nonfiction guy, but I think my research suggests that.
Okay. The answer is no, then. I do not do it in the way that you do it. I don't like my voice as much as you like yours.
Wow. And that, my friends, thanks for coming. All right, asshole, go ahead. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a novel. It'll take me another year or so, and it opens in Cairo at the end of the Second World War, and it ends in New York City in 1999. But that's all I'll tell you about it.
It starts when?
Cairo at the end of the Second World War. Okay. So it's a long span, 50 years.
Is Nasser in it?
I'm not going to tell you.
All right, excellent. Have you mentioned early on that you would start something and put it aside. Is there a box in the house with more than one book abandoned?
Full book-wise, no. There's that one book that I wrote from beginning to end, which I will never pursue for publishing purposes. I have the design thing. I've got many things which I'm in designing on a given time, and so I have many notebooks which might be what I do next, as it were, and then I'm kind of adding to slowly as I go in my spare time.
So we're in a school. So what's your advice to people? Let me ask it this way: what's your advice to readers, and what's your advice to writers?
Wow. Okay. My advice to readers. And advice is too strong a word. What I can do is I can share with you an experience of mine in reading that may be of interest to you. I don't whether I would advise you to do it. I don't know. Maybe not. But I read with three friends, and so we've been reading together for 22 years, and we read in projects. So what we'll do is, and we read a novel a month. We'll meet for dinner, 7 o'clock at a restaurant. We'll close the restaurant. So, we'll meet for 4 or 5 hours to discuss the book. But we do work projects. So what we'll do is we'll take an author and read the author, him or her chronologically. We might read 6 works of theirs chronologically. We might take a region and read a series of books. We might take a moment in time. But my favorite project was one sort of 6-month period, we read Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, Flaubert's Madame Bovary, Henry James's Portrait of a Lady, and George Eliot's Middlemarch. And we called the project 19th Century Wives Under Pressure. Because that's what those books are, man. And they're fascinating because they're written in 4 different countries but they're all within 40 years of each other, those 4 masterworks. And so you're seeing kind of across the West, the rise of the middle class, the new secularization, the changing role of women, the changing role of cities versus country. It's all playing out but in the various landscapes. And so that's what, so as I say, the thing I wanted to share was that this reading project base is so rewarding. It's so much better than reading a single book by an author and moving on. Because if you read 4 books by an author, you really start to hear them better, understand them better. You see the themes resurfacing. You can begin to anticipate things in a way that's very informative. You appreciate the subtleties and the change of the artistic approach over time. Same thing, but if you're looking at a period of time, you start to see the landscape in this interesting way that adds a lot of texture. So the other thing I'd say, and this I shouldn't say this, what I'm about to say, but we principally read dead authors, you know? And I'm a living author, so I have no reason to tell you that. But we do, and it really comes down to the fact that time, history, whatever you want to call it, is very sloppy at capturing all that is great in writing or in art. It's, we're not going to get all. There's many great symphonies that were written that'll never be heard again. There's many great novels that were written that will never be read again because history is not great at capturing all that is great, good in art. However, history is really good at dismissing all that is mediocre. And it takes about 50 years for that to play out. So if you go back and you look today at the writing of the 70s, the early 70s, the 60s, and you go back and look at what was on the best-selling page versus what is still read today, it's an enormous gap, and it's a very informative one. So, because what has survived that period of time, 100 years, 120 years, generally is that kind of work which is so rich that people can keep coming back to it and be rewarded from the experience of reading it. So that's really what we do as readers.
So I want to get to the writer's part, but there are 2 examples I can think of where someone in the position of cultural influence that you have brought someone out of the tomb. David Cecil did it with Barbara Pym, and Gore Vidal did it with Dawn Powell, where they wrote a single essay that took someone that was not being read and brought them back into print and back into the conversation. If I assigned you one writer to do a Lazarus on, who would it be?
I wish I had a great. That's a great question, John. I wish I had a great answer for you. And I don't. I was just told. I don't even know if this is true, but that Borges is potentially going out of print in the United States, which shocks me. As a concept. And I mean, maybe in 20 years from now, I'll know, who it's going to be. Because I think most of my heroes are known still. I wish I had found that person that no one has read and could put them in the spotlight.
And on the writing?
The writing, this is pithy and annoying, but it's true. I really feel like the best advice I can give is read, write, repeat. And I think that comes across from what I'm saying. If you want to be a writer of fiction, that's what it entails. You need to be reading fiction very closely, writing that you don't have to copy that last thing that you read exactly, but you do want to be informed by what you just read and reflect on it, and that will influence your next experiment as you write, and you just keep circling back and forth between the two and advancing, your skill set.
Well, actually, one more, and then I think we're going to have some student questions. We're in a moment of remarkable political tumult in the United States and around the world. Agree or disagree, red or blue, wherever you are on the spectrum, nobody's particularly happy. I'm wondering if, again, from kind of a cultural, critical perspective, do you think periods like this can produce great art in the midst of this kind of division? I'm thinking about the Russians, obviously, and the Middlemarch, which is largely the political background to Middlemarch is the Corn Laws, right? I mean, it's the Reform Bill. Do you look at our politics and think, well, at least we'll get some good novels?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that your premise is a good one, and I think another, of course, great example is all art medium underwent an extraordinary transformation in the aftermath of the First World War. The novel was reinvented, painting was reinvented, music was reinvented, and in ways that still have great bearing and on us today. Those are the works that we admire, that influenced us, and that came out of the great sense of loss, of dislocation. The war was so big in terms of how it affected everybody's life for the worse, that you can't even pinpoint what was it about the war that changed all the art in all these various ways. Because it was everything, right? Everything was thrown up in the air, and people began to sort of rebuild from scratch a sense of purpose, a sense of place, a sense of identity, and and that influences all the art forms, simultaneously. And are we at that level of chaos in the United States? I don't think so, and I hope not. But we are certainly, as you say, in very turbulent times that are very disorienting for many people. And as you say, in both right and left, there's turbulent emotions, whether for the winners and the losers, as it were. The people in charge don't seem very happy or satisfied, and are roiling sometimes with anger and with sort of quickly taking action without much thought and to see what happens later. And so it's both sides seem to be quite unsettled, and I think that yes, there is bound to be serious and interesting art that grows out of that. I think that's true.
I just keep wondering what, if we want to understand Huey Long and the tumult of the 30s, go to All the King's Men. If you want to, obviously, as you say, if you want to understand the chaos after the First World War, there's Hemingway and Remarque and Fitzgerald, and it's almost too easy, that part. But I keep wondering too. World War II, one of the largest events in human history, produced a lot of popular but interestingly not enduring fiction. Right? People don't read From Here to Eternity anymore. They don't read Herman Wouk very much anymore. And I just find it fascinating that these huge events can sometimes produce enduring art, and sometimes it's quite ephemeral.
Well, I think it's very interesting. I'm thinking with my mouth here, right? So my response would be that just like in the First World War, it wasn't like novels and about the war or paintings of the war are what changed, right? It was that the dislocation of the war created all these new ways of approaching art and new senses of urgency and purpose. What happened in the Second World War, the parallel for me, is it's not the works that were made about the war. It's like, for instance, it's the incredible change in the American landscape after the war, which is that, people come back and you have the GI Bill, and suddenly people who had never been educated before were being educated. Ethnic families that had, for 4 generations, been in the same neighborhood, let's say in New York. You grew up in the Irish neighborhood, you lived there. If you're in the Italian neighborhood, you stayed there. And you ate Italian food, you spoke Italian. If you were in the, pick your neighborhood. And suddenly, in the aftermath of the war, all that was blown up, which is that everybody goes they can go to college. They don't want to go home to the old neighborhood. What they want to do is go get a house in the suburbs, and they want to name, whatever their ethnic background, they want to name their children Billy and Jane, and they want to become a part of this sort of great American middle class. The American middle class didn't exist before the Second World War. We talk about it all the time like it's existed forever. But it really came out of that, this incredible change in economics, in ambitions, in ethnic identity, and there's a lot of art that grew out of that, both in some of it in response against to that. All of rock and roll grew up in a way, in response to that,
And Wright and Ellison and Baldwin and Hurston, the literature of protest is is fascinating, because sometimes whether we call it protest sometimes depends on whether the protest becomes part of the mainstream or not.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Students? Let's get some real wisdom here. Introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Key. I'm a senior at MLK. My question is, Mr. Towles, many of your books touch on issues of class and social hierarchies. What steps do you take to be able to convey characters who live in different spheres and speak in different voices?
Okay, yeah, thank you. And, that's a very good question. Well, how to talk about this? I definitely come from the background in the training of my craft, which believes, or I believe, I was taught to believe, that as a young writer, I should write from as many different perspectives as possible, right? That the way to master craft, both the artistic elements, but more importantly, the psychological and social elements, was by, as a young writer, trying to write from a perspective that was not your own. So, as a young person, I was writing short stories about imagining, I'm a young woman at Berkeley in the '60s, who's getting tempted by the protest movement. I'm a violin a violin maker in Vienna in the 1800s. I'm a young black kid in Atlanta, in the 1940s. Whatever. I'm a woman. I'm rich. I'm poor. You just keep changing. And trying to imagine a story, through the story, trying to imagine the world through the eyes of a person whom you are not. And I say this was, I think it was received wisdom, that this was a good way to build craft, because each time you change who you are, and you're to some degree, of course, you're looking at the world you're broadening your understanding of the world. You're developing empathy, which is trying to imagine how do different people feel being in these circumstances which I haven't been in, which is an essential skill as a writer. But then you're also going through great experiments in style and tone, because those characters I just mentioned a second ago would tell their stories in completely different ways. They'd have a different vocabulary. There'd be a different pacing. There'd be a different sentiment behind it, a different social structure. And so each time you took that experiment, you'd be broadening also your command of the ways in which to tell a story artistically. So you're broadening your understanding of theme, of the human experience, but also of the artistic scope itself. So I'm very much a believer that is what a young person should do. And I'm sounding a little hesitant, and that's only because, as many of you know, in recent decades, that's kind of come under fire, right? Under certain circumstances where people have said, no, you have no right to tell that story. Or if you're telling that story, you're stealing the opportunity from someone else to tell that story who has the right to tell that story. Or you don't have the information necessary to tell that story. And I think that while there's aspects of merit to those kinds of critiques, and they have their place in the broader dialogue about writing, they should not be used in a way that tries to get a young person to avoid experimentation. That would be a mistake, right? Well, thank you. And I'll just say at the end of this is that yeah, when you're writing the story, it may not work, but that's okay. You may read it yourself and say, you know what, I didn't nail that. I tried to take on this personality, but that's a great learning experience for a writer. And I think the example I'm going to give, because I do think this matters, and I apologize for going on too long, but the example I like to think of is, let's say I'm going to write a story about a kid in New York, a young Asian American who gets beaten up in the schoolyard, and a racial slur is used as a part of the process. And so you're imagining that story. Okay, how am I going to tell that story? Well, the great thing to understand in this era of where people are sensitive around these issues is, the important thing to understand as an artist is I can tell that story from many different angles. And the important question for me is not what the world thinks, not how it's going to be received, not what the political environment says. The important thing for me to say is, how can I tell the story best? And so I might start by telling it from the perspective of the kid who gets beaten up, and at a certain point be like, this doesn't feel right. But I can be the kid who's walking who's not the Asian American, who stops the fight and who walks the kid home. Maybe they live in the same building, and so they kind of don't know each other, but they kind of know each other. And that's who's going to tell the story. It could be the mother of that kid, who, the kid brings him home and says, John was beaten up in the schoolyard today, and the mother has to then talk to the mother, bring that boy to his mother, and they end up a conversation. But the point is that material, if that's what I want to talk about, it is appropriate that I should be thinking about it from all these different angles and trying to figure out what's the right angle for me to tell this story. Again, not politically, but artistically. Where does it come alive in a way that for the benefit? And it may be that I tell it from all four perspectives, which is which I've done in my work as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Aster Stevenson. I'm a senior here too. And my question is that A Gentleman in Moscow, it ends with some riveting twists. And I was wondering if the novel and its conclusions were inspired by other stories of heists and escapes.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So I'll say that first thing is that I tend to, as I kind of implied earlier, when I start a novel, I know how it's ending, and so it's a quick thing. There's a lot of writers who write like this. They start with a great idea, a great premise, a great situation, a great opening sentence, whatever, a memory. And then they start to pursue it. And they just sort of see where it goes. And then often, in unskilled hands, what can happen is you can feel it, kind of coming apart. And sort of, because they haven't quite sort of figured it out. They haven't thought it through in advance. I try to write like that. And to do that, that means I'm thinking way in advance. How is all this stuff that I'm opening with, where is it going? How are all the various elements going to come together? How do they bear on each other? How do the characters change? And how does that influence them? And what does this all mean? And so I'm always kind of moving in the direction of this sort of culminating events, which I think hopefully are tied together. But the example that you give is an interesting one. In A Gentleman in Moscow, it begins in 1920, it ends in 1950. I was very conscious of the fact that the tone at the beginning should feel a little bit like a 19th century novel, because the Count is born in the 19th century. He has that sensibility. But I wanted it to move towards almost a 1950s spy novel. As events catch up with him, as the world is changing, as the Count sort of finds himself embroiled in sort of political events. So in that sense, it was very conscious of, we're gonna have this sort of baton being passed in the way the story is told, and then you kind of get the advantage of having that exciting conclusion. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, I'm Isata Kalan, a senior at MLK. My question is, building on the theme of inspiration, do you write in the moment when you feel inspiration, or do you write all the time and find your inspiration along the way? John probably feels, I think, similar about this, but I think inspiration is what happens when you show up every day at the same time, Meaning, I don't show up at 8:30 and the inspiration's at 8:31, But I don't think that I think the worst thing that a young artist can do, and I'm saying for this from experience, is the worst thing you can do is wait for inspiration, right? You can waste time in a lot of different ways before inspiration shows up, and now more than ever, right? There is so much good television, It's like you could spend 2 lifetimes watching television, and be satisfied doing it, But no, so you do. I think you do have to show up and you just start pushing and writing. And what does happen is that at a certain point, and it's very hard to predict when it happens. And they talk about it in modern parlance as flow, where you've lost track of where you are, of what you're doing, and it's happening for you. And you don't know what minute that's going to happen. But what I can guarantee you is if you sit down every day and work on your art, whatever it is, that will happen at some point every day. And that's, where the magic comes from.
That's a great question. One of our previous honorees, Evan Thomas, our mutual friend, calls it the pencil sharpening problem. You can always spend a lot of time sharpening your pencils, making the Keurig work, Just start typing.
Yeah, start typing.
Hi, my name's Sakina Saptain. I'm a junior here at MLK. And have there been any scenes or passages that you have had to cut from your books? And if so, like, what's the revision process?
You're cutting all the time. So revision 1, draft 1 to draft 2 for me, I'm probably going to end up throwing out about a third of the work, something like that. As you rethink and reinvent the work to try to make it richer and better. And so cutting is as it's as important to the it's like sculpture. The sort of the famous notion of when we look at a statue, of a great sculptor, what we're seeing is everything that's been taken away, right? That's what the nature of sculpture is. You're pulling away fragments of stone until what you have left is the David in the middle. And there's an element to that. Your first draft is creating the block of stone, and then you start chipping away at it until the David is standing there. So it's as important to the process as the creative process.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alice Moore. I'm a junior here at MLK. My question is, your recently published collection, Table for Two, showcases short stories. What inspired your shift from longer novels to short stories? And if I can add a follow-up, do you have any favorite short stories from other authors?
Are you going to kick me out if this isn't a long answer? Who's in charge?
You're fine. They'll just leave.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Feel free to go.
Doors are open.
Yeah, feel free. Nothing's keeping
This
here.
is not like the Hotel Metro Bowl. So.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is I think there's the short story and the novel are very different art forms, and I wrote short fiction as a kid, and in college and high school, and then I wrote novels, and but I've been writing short fiction along the way, and last year I was asked to edit the O. Henry Awards, where you're reading. The team reads 1,000 stories, they give you 100, and then you choose 20. And so in the course of, as I was finishing Table for Two, I was also judging the O. Henry Awards, and so I was spending a lot of time with short fiction, and I thought a lot about how they differ, and I want to share that, but to set this up, I have to tell you that my high school English teacher, my favorite teacher in high school was a guy named Dick Baker. And he was my English teacher. And he was the guy in our school who really taught us how to read, with a pen, so that you were underlining and circling and identifying patterns in what you were reading, a short story or a novel. He's the person who putting in the margin, your observations. He's the person who taught us how to write, how to take that novel and make a case. You're making your case of what the book is about or what the chapter is about, and drawing from the novel or the short story, using the evidence in it to make your case. He's the guy who taught us all that. And he was a man of great, he's still alive, he's a man of great intellect and intellectual curiosity and honor, fantastic teacher. At any rate, when he would hand back our papers, it would all be marked up, how we can improve our essay. And when he would hand back mine, the most common comment that he would make in the margin was SUG. And what that stood for was sweeping, unsupported generality. Yeah. And he meant that as a criticism, So what I'm about to share with you is a sweeping, unsupported generality about the difference between long fiction and short fiction and the pleasures of them. So the nature of a novel is it's very much, for the writer, about orientation, the creation of a novel. And so what I mean by this is that consciously or unconsciously, if you look at, say, the first 40 pages in particular, it's about orientation, the opening. Because what happens in the writing of a novel, what you have to do is, a novel is really about evolution. It's about how a character changes, about how themes unfold, how events, one lead to another and to another. And so for that to occur in a novel, which is at the heart of a novel, you have to have a starting point, which the reader understands and feels confident about, whether consciously or unconsciously. So a lot of the work in the early part of a novel is about orientation, orienting the reader so they know where they are, they know when this is taking place, they know who these people are. And when I say where, I don't mean Nashville. right? I mean, you might take a little segment of Nashville, but you have to have the character of that place. And when I say when, I don't just mean a date, because times have their character. So that has to be shared and communicated in those early pages. The people, their backgrounds, their interrelations, events from the past that might have bearing on this story. All that has to be built into the early part of the novel in a way that is seamless and invisible to you, but such that when you reach page 60, you are ready to go on and you know where you are and haven't even noticed that it was taking place. Okay, so orientation is very critical in the novel. Well, none of this occurs in the short story. And because you don't have time. And what I've come to think of the short story really as is, think of it as you go to a restaurant and you're at dinner, and as you sit down with your significant other at a table for two, there's a table for two to your right, and as you're sitting down, they're in the middle of it. They're hot, you know, and in fact, you know, they're so into it that they're not even bothering to lower their voices. You know, they're going at it, and so while you're like pretending to read the menu, you know, you're kind of like, you know, listening in to what's happening. And as they're talking, you're like, wait a second. So is she his wife? You know, and how old is she? You know, what did he do last night? And who's Tony? You know? Right? And so then, you know, just when you think you're piecing it together, getting a sense of what's happening, they pay their bill and leave, you know? And you want to follow them out of the restaurant into the parking lot and be like, wait, I have questions, you know? All right, so this is what the short story is like, right? The short story is you don't have this big introduction and to go over this long evolution with these big culminating events. What you have is you're dropped in and you're overhearing. And you're trying to piece together as quickly as possible. Wait, what's going on? Who are they? Why is this happening? Where is this taking place? And just when it's all coming together, it's over. The story's over. And it's left for you then, as the reader, to reflect on, what does this mean? There's this moment in time. There's a fight, an argument at Thanksgiving at dinner, you know, and between, you know, in the family, there's an argument. And you're left to ask yourself, what's going to happen going forward? Is the marriage going to survive? You know, is Aunt Edith ever going to come back for Thanksgiving again, you know? And, you know, that's the nature of the short story. It's to open up it's to look at a little aperture of time that open up a whole series of questions, you know? So the short story for me, that difference, hopefully it's pleasing to me as the writer to have that different kind of writing experience. Hopefully it's pleasing to the reader, you know? And for those of you who don't read short stories, I'll just conclude with this remark, which is that when I was on the road for Table for Two, a guy comes up to the signing table, and he says, "Hey, you know, I really like your work, but I got to tell you, when I bought Table for Two, I was a little disappointed to find out that it was, you know, a collection of short stories, because, you know, I don't really like short stories that much." And I said, "Oh, you know, that's okay. You don't have to like short stories, you know. And you know, what is it about short stories you don't like?" And he says, "Oh, well, I wouldn't know because I never read them." So let that not be your excuse, okay?
As Tim Russert used to say, what a country. Last one, here we go.
All right, my name is Silas Beckham. I'm a junior here at MLK. And my question for you today isn't about books, it's about people. So much of your work features characters who pay attention to politeness, civility, and propriety in their manner and speech. If you're comfortable with commenting on this, can you give us your perspective on the general state of play of good manners in the world today?
Ringer, ringer.
Pull the fire alarm. Let's go. You know, it is, for, you know, how do you begin? So first, you know, John and I are both great fans of the Founding Fathers in our own ways, and you know, and it's amazing to go back and read their work and their journals and their letters, and how seriously they took manners and etiquette. They took it very, very, very seriously. And you know, so let's talk for a second about what manners and etiquette are, right? And you know, they go all the way back to the age of chivalry. Right? And if you think about the knight, you know, the knight as a figure,
The knight was supposed to be a person of honor, so didn't lie, didn't steal, would save the life of someone who was an innocent person in duress, would put their own life at risk in order to achieve that, were true to their, their country, et cetera. So that was the honor side. But the knight was also expected to behave well at court, which meant that at the table, and the way they addressed people, how they behaved towards a woman, how they behaved towards someone elderly, how they behaved to somebody, a king, let's say. Now, in that time, there was no separation between these two things, right? Between the honorable actions and the polite behavior at court. The understanding was that these things go hand in hand. They're tied together. And that kind of went down through the generations. And the founding fathers, who were all educated both by studying, the Romans and the Greeks, but also by the Age of Enlightenment thinkers, coming out, and the ideas that grew out of the Age of Chivalry, were very interested in how these things came together, and aspired to them. And they believed, and you want to remember that a lot of the little manners of etiquette are designed really as a training ground for the virtues, right? So the example I give is you're at a dinner party, right? And you're at a dinner party, and if you behave, a bad behavior would be things like you take second helpings, without with the first person to take second helpings because you're eating so quickly or whatever. You ignore the person on your left. You say something crass to the person on your right. You make a pass at a woman, at the dinner, because you find her attractive. Whatever. You make a boorish joke. All right. This is all bad etiquette, obviously. But the important thing to understand in terms of the history of etiquette is that the reason these things are bad or looked down upon, and the reason that you are supposed to do something different, is because the little differences that you make in these things are windows onto a greater virtue. So that, for instance, not serving yourself seconds, but saying, would you like some? Before I take some, would you like some? Being, gracious to the host, being not making the rude joke or what have you. All these little things which are being well-mannered are actually small versions of charity, of patience, of grace, of these grander ideas. And so the etiquette was designed as a way for the young, but also for the not so young, as pursue this, behave well in this small thing, and that will take you on the road to a greater, a more virtuous behavior among your peers and in life, and you'll be a more honorable person as a result. And as I say, the Founding Fathers were obsessed with these notions, and that had been handed down from the Stoics to the Age of Enlightenment to them. They pursued them very actively. They thought about these things very carefully. And the reason it became really important during the formation of the Union, the Republic, is because you had very different people from, the country was extremely different. The South was very different than the North at that time. And the Bostonians and the Richmond and the Georgians were very different. They were suspicious of each other. They're suspicious of each other's intentions. There had been no history of them really working together as states, as we led up to the Declaration of Independence. And as they went into these conferences where they're going to begin to, are we going to work together? What is that going to look like? What are we going to try to become? What is the nation going to look like? What are our principles? Well, the etiquette was relied upon to serve as the means by which they could bridge these differences and to ensure that they would, in their best possible means, listen to each other, respect each other, pursue the ideal outcome regardless of their vanities, their greed, their impatience, their rashness. They were trying to keep all that under control and to listen to their higher angels, as John would say, and to forge this better thing. So yeah, I am very interested in how, in the modern era, etiquette and honor, the separation has occurred, and how do they interplay? And I'm very interested in how people behave towards each other and how they become themselves in this context of these various things. But yeah, do we as a generation, will we benefit from shoving the public behavior a little bit more towards civility? I'm sure of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It takes a lot of courage. At that age to get up in a crowd this size and ask those questions. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for asking your questions. We really appreciate it. And before this person, I want to thank Jon Meacham. I know. I want to thank Jon Meacham.
No.
Really, for coming.
We're not going to thank that.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Luke, and I have the honor and privilege of being the director of the Nashville Public Library. It has been such a joy to be able to spend the morning with all of you. I want to thank everyone for being here, but also for all of those tuning in to today's live stream as we honor Amor Towles in conversation with Jon Meacham. Every November, we take some time in our busy lives to join this annual public lecture so we can experience the things that we enjoy the most: reading, learning, and ideas. And we celebrate the thing that we care about the most, the library. And for me and for everyone at Nashville Public Library, today is also a time to celebrate you, the readers, the customers, the volunteers, and the supporters who make Nashville Public Library so special. You are the reason that we come to work every day. We watch your families grow every week during story time. We are there when you discover something new from our collection. We get to know you and you trust us. You give us the privilege of serving our community. You are a gift, and I am grateful for you. Mr. Towles, would you please join me at the podium? Because I'd like to present you with a small gift. At Nashville Public Library, we talk a lot about imagination. We imagine a world full of books and a place to read them all. We imagine a world full of ideas and a place to discover them all. Then we imagine a place where all people are welcome, all the time, and we call that the library. So, Mr. Towles, this year, you are helping us to celebrate how libraries serve the world, and now you are a part of the Nashville Public Library family. So please accept this special art piece. It's entitled Imagine, as well as your own very own Nashville Public Library card. So thank you so much. I mean, this is just such a joy and such a wonderful weekend. So I hope that you've enjoyed this morning, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. This concludes our program, and if you would like to purchase a book from our friends at Parnassus, they're available over at the table.